Were you in the ballet as a child? Do you absolutely love going to clubs? Do you wish you could just dance all of the time in the shower, the closet, even your car? Well, if this describes you and you're someone who really wants to play Last Epoch, then this is the only build for you. All right, hello and welcome. This is the Dancing Strikes Bladedancer guide, which is another version of Shadow Daggers, but this one uses, as the name suggests, Dancing Strikes as a primary part of its rotation, giving it a much different stylistic approach to a Shadow Dagger build, because Dancing Strikes is a very different kind of skill where you literally dance around attacking enemies with your, in this case, daggers, dealing damage and also creating buffs as you do it, never standing still. It's very much like a brawler playstyle, which is interesting that it comes from the rogue, but that is what this is, and it's a pretty cool playstyle if you like a brawler kind of option and still like Shadow Daggers or just want something that that feels good, still does good damage. This is a nice alternative to the other two Shadow Dagger options. So let's go ahead and get into what this build does well, what it doesn't, and then all of the details of the build itself. So for pros, it is a unique playstyle. It definitely plays different than currently anything else that this game has, and I can't really say I've ever played anything quite like this in any other game either. It is a solid monolith farmer. It is fast. It is not quite as fast as the other Shadow Dagger builds, but it can be, actually. If you don't want to stop and hit everything, it can go very, very quickly, and then when it reaches bosses, it can then kill them or whatever the objective is. It's actually not much slower. Typically, though, you're probably going to stop and attack some enemies on the way. It is tanky with good gear. It can get quite tanky, and it has high movement speed, especially since we use double smoke weavers in this one, which you use more for the dodge chance, but the upside of that is we have upshift a lot of the time. And it does have very good damage with its buffs up. On the con side, though, it is vulnerable when not moving. There's very few times when you shouldn't be moving because Dancing Strikes is a movement skill, so if you're using it, you are moving. But if you're going to do something like use your smoke bomb or your decoy, then you will stop for a short period of time, at which point you will take a lot more damage if you get hit. The buffs on this build are difficult to manage. It is hard to hit enemies consistently with it without losing those buffs because there's such a short cooldown. So at the top end, this build actually does very good damage and is very, very tanky, but those buffs fall off a lot. It is a melee playstyle, which is inherently dangerous in this game. This is no different. Dancing Strikes can be hard to control. It is something you can get used to and actually begin to flow very quickly. It's actually quite fun. I hadn't played this in months, and I popped it on here to do this video, and it felt like second nature. So once you start playing it, you'll get used to the feel, but at first it's going to feel pretty weird. It's also a dual wield setup, which technically takes more damage. It takes 9% more damage from being a dual wield, but most of that's offset by the tankiness. So it's still is relatively tanky overall. Okay, let's go ahead now and get into the skills. So Dancing Strikes is the primary star of this show, and it's the thing that makes it, that really sets it apart from the other Shadow Dagger builds. The big part that makes it a Shadow Daggers build is Dark Blades, giving us one Shadow Dagger stack every time we hit enemies with Dancing Strikes. We also get a lot from this section over here with Rhythm, which is the buff that stacks. It only lasts for 2 seconds, and that's why it can be difficult to maintain. But when you do have it up, you get global damage. You get more damage, which is a multiplier that stacks with this number of stacks you have. We get up to 8 with this setup. It's almost impossible to maintain more than that, which is why we don't go to 5 of 5 here. But that's still 40% more damage, which is global, so it actually applies to Shadow Daggers. We get 30% dodge rating stacked again. So 8 times 30 is 240% dodge rating, which is a lot of dodge. And we get global crit multi. Again, if we have to get up to 8, it's 160% global crit multi. So if you can maintain lots of stacks, you can do a lot of damage with this build. It also has some good tankiness down here. There's the dodge rating, but also the damage over time taken, minus 30, basically whenever you're using it, and for 1 second after. At the top here, we do have Hidden Blades, which gives us some more Shadow Cascade procs, which is just a little extra damage. All right, Umbral Blades. This is the traditional setup for it for a Shadow Dagger build. Umbral Remnant drops Umbral Blades whenever we use Shadow Cascade, which we will on Shift, and we will also sometimes on Shadow Daggers. Lethal Darkness is what actually inflicts Shadow Daggers with it, and then we use Cacophony of Steel and the nodes with it to create a spinning blade that also homes in. And finally, we take Cold Snap Strike to give this some chill chance, which does create or cause Umbral Blades to be a cold skill, which does not affect the damage because Shadow Daggers is not being converted itself. It's only Umbral Blades and Shadow Daggers is our damage. As far as Shift goes, it's another fairly standard setup. We're going to go and take Momentum to get all that movement speed buff into Lasting Presence and Dancing Shadows so that we can create a shadow and then expire it with Shadow Cascade, which drops an Umbral Blade, but also cast Shadow Cascade, which we're going to want to do. We get Shadow Slip for invulnerability while shifting, Elusive for dodge rating per dexterity, and then we do take Consumed by Shadow at the end, but not particularly important compared to the rest of this. Shadow Cascade, we are going to take Dagger Dance into Shadow Elegance, so we're going to get that the Shadow Dagger procs again. We are going to take Fight in the Shadows and Onslaught for mana if we need them. If you find that you don't need these nodes at all, and if you find you don't need the Frailty chance, you can go over here and take Shadow Flourish to get some increased physical damage. This will only apply if you hit 4 enemies with Shadow Cascade, so it's already going to be in big packs, but it will give you some damage some of the time. Otherwise, you can go with the standard setup here, which gives you Frailty, mana, and of course, Shadow Daggers. The last thing we have is Smoke Bomb. This has changed from the previous setup where we used Knives in the Dark. Unfortunately, Knives in the Dark was nerfed, and it's just underperforming now. It's just not good enough. There's not enough Shadow Dagger procs to really warrant it. We are better buffing our other Shadow Daggers with Smoke Blades, which is now added melee damage for every second for 4 seconds. This gets up to 80 melee and throwing damage, which is insane. It's 160 added damage with Shadow Daggers. Very, very strong. We're also going to get our Silver Shroud stack from Moonlight Bomb, and we're going to get a bunch of Dust Shroud stacks for Glancing Blow and Dodge Rating from Rapid Concealment. This build, because of all the dodge stuff, we have this stuff here and the other stuff we were talking about with Dancing Strikes and the double Smoke Weavers, gets consistently like 60 to 80 dodge chance. So it is very, very hard to hit. All right, that's all the skills. Let's talk about the passives. This is also going to look fairly similar if you've ever played a Shadow Dagger setup. But in case you haven't, we have Evasion here. Damage taken while moving. This is very strong. It was nerfed a little bit here for 1.0. It's now 4% per point instead of 5%, which means it's 20% total versus 25. Unfortunate, but still good. Agility, haste on hit chance, and increased damage per movement speed. This is primarily really good for the damage per movement speed, but the haste is nice too. When you use dancing strikes, your movement speed doesn't really apply, but it still will be nice to go from pack to pack, which you'll do quite a bit, and then the damage on movement speed is really, really great. Blood Dance is going to give you a ton of leech, really help you take care of your sustain, so that's going to be awesome. There is a low life setup that we'll want to remove this, but for most setups, it's going to be with Blood Dance. You're going to want that. All In is a huge critical multiplier, critical strike multiplier. We don't care about damage that's not a Shadow Dagger, and a Shadow Dagger always crits, so we always want this. Swift Assassin and Once gives us more added damage, both melee and throwing, which Shadow Daggers has both tags. Therefore, we get the benefit of both. Once also has really nice dodge rating of hit recently, so even more dodge. Pursuit gives us more movement speed and some increased damage, which is nice. We also have Focus Fire and Woundmaker in here to take care of crit vulnerability and dodge. They're going to effectively turn those off on enemies when they hit them. And Perfection, Confidence, and Exuberance are a really strong buff as well that provides us with dodge and armor and also increased damage. If you play on hardcore or you were playing low life, you're going to want Death's Door. This is a substantial damage taken reduction. so damage reduction. That will be most valuable when you are low life, but will also kick in if you are hardcore and go low. It's not amazing though, because it only counts if you're already low life. So for hardcore, maybe it'll save you, maybe it won't. But that's why we don't take it for softcore, because it's not super valuable. But when you're hardcore, any advantage you can get, you're going to take it. All right, let's talk about the skill rotation. So it's a little bit different than the Shadow Dagger's Bladedancer setup versus the Dancing Strikes Bladedancers. You're going to shift on cooldown, and then when you get close to enemies, packs, tanky enemies, you're going to start using Dancing Strikes. You're going to shift around into them, weaving in and out. When shift comes back off cooldown, shift out of them, allow Umbral Blades to basically do the damage. That's going to kill pretty much everything. In extended fights, cast Smoke Bomb. Use it in between Dancing Strikes attack. If the enemies become overwhelming, you can use Decoy to taunt them and buy some time. Do note that if you're using Smoke Bomb and Shift at the same time, you can lose your rhythm stacks. So try to stagger them in between Dancing Strikes attacks so you can keep up rhythm. Remember, rhythm is that buff that you get from Dancing Strikes that stacks but only has a 2-second cooldown. So it's very easy to lose it. Mapping is pretty much the same. There's not a whole lot of changes there. Same thing with bossing. You're just going to use Smoke Bomb constantly and try to stay in it to significantly maximize your damage and your defenses. Okay, let's talk about gear. Gear is very similar to the other Shadow Dagger, or to the Shadow Dagger Bladedancer setup. We do want Wings of Argentis, especially in this one, because we are always moving and we're always in the pack, so that 20% less damage taken is very good for this. We also are running double Smoke Weavers, which will give us a ton of dodge rating. Also very important for how often we are in the fray. And Siphon of Anguish is also very good in this for Leech, for movement speed, for elemental resistance, and a multiplier to our melee damage portion of Shadow Daggers. Outside of that, this is a pretty standard setup. You like Leech, you like health. You do like cooldown recovery. This is a little bit different. So this is one area where it does change. Dancing Strikes does not at all scale with attack speed, but it does scale with cooldown recovery speed in a similar way. So the more cooldown recovery speed you have, the faster your Dancing Strikes go, the better it feels, but also the more damage you do. So you do want cooldown recovery speed basically wherever you can get it. You also want +3 Dancing Strikes. It's going to be worth it. And you want increased dodge rating. And of course, Fizz Pen with Shadow Daggers at wherever you can get it. It's going to be hard to get it on Wings of Argentis. If you do, congratulations. You just got like a really, really crazy item. But you can get it on your helmet, and you can get it on your idols. We'll talk about the idols a little bit more in a second. Now, for 1.0, we have added the low life setup. This is new to this build. It's new to the Shadow Dagger setups in general. It is a high EHP setup that can affect how much damage it can do in a negative, but it will actually make this build very, very tanky. When it's already pretty tanky, because it's going to, A, give you ward that's going to be much higher than your health would be, and B, you're going to stack strength with this, because you're going to use Cleaver Solution to stack strength to get intelligence to get your ward retention that you're going to need to actually scale up your ward. And this is going to give you a lot of armor, because strength gives you 4% increased armor per point. So you'll have a ton of armor, and you will also have a lot of ward. This setup can go, I believe this one can go over 20k ward if you get like really, really crazy gear. How you're getting that, by the way, is you're going to get it from Last Steps of the Living, Exsanguinous, and from the experimental fix on your gloves. These all give ward per missing health, but also reduce your health per second, meaning you'll be in a low life state, and then you'll benefit from that by gaining ward based upon all of that health that you're missing. So that's the difference in this setup. You're also going to want a Twisted Heart of Okairos just for like sort of a stat stick. It gives you increased health and strength, and you can also turn it into a legendary with strength on it. That is an insane item if you get it for your EHP. That is pretty much all that changes between the low life setup and the endgame setup. Let's go ahead and talk about the blessings, and then we'll get into the idols, and then we'll be basically done. Blessings, we want Grand Echo of Solarum to take care of our Void Res. This single-handedly can do it. If you get a perfect roll or even close to that, it's worth it. We are taking Grand Bastion of Divinity for our lightning resistance. Same thing as Void Resistance. We are taking Grand Survival of Might for Critical Strike Avoidance. This, along with a Tier 5 on your ring, is enough to crit cap you. And then we're going to take the 2 Armor Blessings down below, which will give us quite a bit of armor. And if you're in a low life setup, even more armor. As far as your idols, you can go 2 ways with these. You can go Fizz Pen with Shadow Daggers for more damage, or you can go Increased Health for, well, more health. And on the suffix, Elemental Resistance or Increased Shred Armor Effect are both very good. Elemental Resistance, obviously, to cap that resistance, but once you're there, you can switch it to Armor Shred Effect for the rest. As far as the other idols, you want double health whenever you can. If you are missing resistances, you can also fill those here instead until you get them on your gear. All right, let's talk really quickly about the build scaling, and then we truly are done. Flat melee and throwing damage are very, very, very good for Shadow Daggers. I will update this. This is actually, I think, 370% now. It did get a bit of a nerf, not enough to make this build not great, but it did get a bit of a nerf, so we'll adjust that. Fizz Pen with Shadow Daggers, as we talked about, very, very good. Cooldown reduction with damage dancing strikes is how you basically scale it, the way you'd scale attack speed in other builds. Increased mana regen isn't a huge problem, but you do want enough to make the build feel good because it does cost some mana, so you're going to want some of that on your gear. Critical Strike Multiplier is a very strong stat. We're going to get a lot of it from our passive tree. Shred Armor, we're going to get plenty of that in this build, so we'll shred their armor, which will be a damage multiplier. Dexterity is a good stat, but not an amazing stat on this build, but it does give us dodge and increased damage. And increased damage, we're going to get a lot of that from not Smoke Bomb anymore, because it's now additive, but we're going to get it from Dexterity and passives, and some physical damage on our belt, which will be more than enough. As far as defense goes, we have Evasion and Wings of Argentis giving us both damage reduction while moving. Very, very strong. Our dodge is insanely high on this build. We also get Silver Shroud stacks, which give us a guaranteed dodge, so that's great. And we have some dot damage reduction from a number of places, including Evasion and Wings of Argentis, but also from Crimson Shrouds from Prolonged Demise. Silver Shrouds we talked about, guaranteed dodges. They are excellent, and you can time them up with Smoke Bomb to get basically a free dodge on a big attack. Glancing Blow, we don't have a ton of this, but we do have some, so it does provide us with some damage reduction. Armor Mitigation is pretty solid. Is very, very solid on the low life setup. Either way, though, you have a good bit of armor. Let's see, anything else you want to talk about? We talked about decoy. We talked about health. We talked about leech. We do have chill. We talked about that from our umbral blades. We do also get frailty. And we get a cleansing on the belt, which helps us to cleanse away dots and other debuffs that might be on us. We talked about critical strike avoidance, and we do get endurance where we can. All right, that covers all of that. Loot filter section is right here. This is not currently updated for 1.0, but will be by 1.0 with the COF and MG filters. So you'll have those available to you for whatever faction you choose to go with. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great time with this build and an awesome time at 1.0, and I will see you all again real soon.